Hi guys, I'm Emerald and today I have a book video for you guys. I don't know how to do book videos. I'm probably just gonna ruin all the stories for everyone, but I'm gonna try my hardest. Hopefully I'll get better at it. But basically I'm gonna be doing like a, if you like this book, try this book. So without further ado, I'm gonna stop rambling and start talking about books. So the first book I'm gonna speak about is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. This is such a stunning, stunning book. It is so heavy and deep and discusses just such heavy topics in such a beautiful, poetic way. I've never had a book make me cry as hard as this one, and it's one of those stories that will really just sit with you. The book is basically our main character writing a letter to his mother, who came here as a refugee and an immigrant from Vietnam during the wartime. His whole story is this mix of experiencing his mother and the trauma that she has from the war and coming here to the US, mixed with his trauma that he has being an immigrant and growing up Asian in the US, and then also later kind of his trauma of growing up queer in a small rural town and how hidden and unacceptable it was. And then later how that love was very beautiful but turned into something, again, very heartbreaking and traumatic. It's an incredibly sad story, but so much of this book has stuck with me. It really has to do of the heartbreak and the trauma and a lot of the hardships that a lot of people have to go through when they are in a queer relationship. And it is just a beautiful, beautiful book. So if you enjoyed this, I really think that you will enjoy The Tin Man. This is also a really heartbreaking queer book that also has really stuck with me. It basically follows our main character, and he also has a lot of very interesting relationships and memories associated with his mother, and that's basically the first part of this book. And then eventually he grows up and is in a relationship and starts to question and experiment with his sexuality, and somebody very dear to him and the other people he's in a relationship with kind of just drops off the face of the earth. And later throughout the book he finds a series of letters and diaries from that missing person, and he kind of uncovers the other side of the story and what this person was going through when they kind of like disappeared. This book takes place during the AIDS epidemic, and it definitely speaks a lot and pulls on the trauma of the community through that time going through all of this. So if you want to just read really beautiful, sad, traumatic queer books, these two are perfect. So my next books are a little bit lighter. The first book is If I Had Your Face. It follows this group of girls, and I believe they're all living in the same apartment building. They're all connected in some way, but all of their lives are very different, and they all have different levels of beauty. So you have one girl who's like this beautiful, not quite a call girl, she's like a lounge girl, so she sits with like businessmen and serves them drinks and all those things. So she's very beautiful, she's very dolled up. And then you have another girl that's very privileged, and she has that like chic art student like vibe that is also very beautiful. And then you have another woman who is trying to be beautiful, and she is trying to save up her money and get plastic surgery. And you just switch between these girls' lives and how they're treated in different ways, and it is so interesting. It was definitely rooted, because it's a Korean book, in Korean beauty standards, which are very different than the US standards. So it's so interesting of like how nonchalant the talk of like Botox and all these things are in these women's lives. This was definitely a great read, and if you enjoyed this book, I think that you would really like this book. This book made me angry. So it basically follows our main character throughout her entire life, but the traditions and the societal pressures that she has faced feels so antiquated, and then the book will just drop a fact and a statistic and bring you back to reality, where it's like, this is not a 1980s housewife or even 1950s housewife, this is happening right now. It really highlights the inequalities that women still face in Korea and the gender norms that are forced upon them in the traditions. You should really read this book if you just want to get mad. Like, I was fuming reading this. I feel like these books are super complimentary. So the next book I'm going to talk about is Outlawed. This book is kind of a romp, and basically it's back in like the olden days when women were basically just there to make a baby. And when this one main character, or I believe her name was Ada, when Ada can't make a baby, they basically think that she's a witch and send her to a nunnery as punishment. And then from there, it just gets a little crazy. She really becomes an outlaw and joins this group of cowboys. And from there, she kind of unlocks everyone's backstory, and it takes a very gay turn. And in similar veins to this, I feel like if you like Outlawed, you would love The Matrix by Lauren Groff. Again, both of our main characters are sent to a nunnery as punishment, and it also has a very gay twist. I am super biased. I fucking love Lauren Groff. Lauren Groff is to me as like Sally Rooney is to UnCarly. Like, this woman could spit in a napkin and I will read it. But this book was really stunning. It's kind of like a historical fiction, and it follows our main character who's like whatever the female equivalent of a bastard is, and she's part of the royal family, and she gets kicked out and sent to be the Matrix. So like the main, what is it? Gonna be so American. The president of the nunnery. Like, she's in charge of this nunnery with all of these nuns. And this book is so good. She is just a super strong, educated woman, and she keeps having these visions that God sends to her, and she becomes this like beautiful prophet figure, and she really turns this nunnery around and just liberates all of these nuns in it. And as the country starts falling apart around her, she still is able to make sure that the nunnery is safe and strong and secure. Both of the books kind of talk about these themes of like how religion kind of leaves out women and really reduces them. So when you have a woman like this who is very strong and smart and powerful, a lot of people feel like it's God doing it and not the woman herself. I really think that this book isn't talked about enough, and it's beautiful. So another book I loved was Milk, Blood, Heat. It's a bunch of women-based short stories from Florida, and they're just like swampy, sweaty tales of being a young girl. And this was a super good book if you're into short story collections and very like no plot, just vibes. This is a brilliant book, but I read it after I read Lauren Groff's Florida. Those two are basically the same book. It's female based, like Florida short stories. This one's a little bit slower, but it has that beautiful Lauren Groff surreal but not really like touch, and to this day this has one of my favorite first lines in any book ever, and I'll read it to you. I have somehow become a woman who yells. And that whole short story is about this woman who goes on these walks at night so that she doesn't yell at her kids and husbands, and she looks in these other swampy Florida homes at the houses and just ponders about where her life went wrong. And it's fucking great. This book is, again, no plot, just vibes. And so many of the stories and the ruminations that these women have, it trickles into my life and I think about all the time. It's very emotional, but it has that very stale poetic nature that Japanese literature and like Carver tends to have, where it's not like these big dramatic soap opera stories. It's just like this silent sadness in the heart, and that I just eat it up. So yeah, highly recommend Florida. So speaking of Japanese literature, actually that's a book I'm gonna recommend, but right now I'm gonna talk about Lord of the Flies. I know that this is like a high school reading book. I personally love it. It's one of my favorite books. It's about a group of boys who crash land on a deserted island, and right off the bat there's like all of these rules and hierarchies, and the boys split up, and there's like a certain group that is very like aggressive and animalistic, and then another group who is very like organized and trying to just keep the peace. And it's so interesting seeing these kids play roles that you're not used to seeing kids play, yet it still aligns with how kids actually are. And I feel like this book, The Sailor Who Fell with Grace from the Sea, is very similar. This cover doesn't do it justice. I bought this cover because it looked like a soap opera. This book is not a soap opera. This book is fucked up as shit, but it's about this 13-year-old boy and like his gang, and basically it's like a philosophy gang, except they ruminate a lot about what it is to be an actual adult, what traits they should have as an adult, and what it means to be a real man. And they take it to a very, very, very intense, serious route. The whole catalyst of the story is his mom gets a boyfriend, and him and his mom have a very creepy, fucked up like relationship. But his mother gets a boyfriend who is a sailor. So it's a super weird juxtaposition of like, he's a 13-year-old boy who just loves sailors in the ocean, but also with this like weird philosophy background where he's like, at a certain point, he deems this boyfriend as not man enough, and kind of him and his friends begin to plot this punishment, and the book just escalates and escalates. Huge trigger warning for animal abuse. There is a moment, and you'll know if you read this, I just didn't read it, but that moment and how things loop in at the end, I think about it to this day. Like, this is a beautiful, beautiful, horrible, disgusting, gorgeous, powerful book, and I love it. It got me into Mishima, and yeah, if you're into little boys just being weird and aggressive and like pseudo-philosophical, read this, because it's just feral little boys and it's so interesting, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's one of my all-time favorite books. I don't know what that says as me as a person, but one of my favorite books. And then finally, I'm gonna leave this on a weird note. I'm gonna talk about Paradise Rot. And I have two recommendations based on like different cores of this book. Paradise Rot feels like a fever dream, and it's about this woman coming from like Norway, a cold European country, and she's in a new country. I believe it's Australia, could be vice versa, I don't know. She's out of her element. She's in this new city. It's very odd, and it feels like disassociation. She is just floating through life, and she gets into this weird housing situation in this like abandoned home with this other woman, and from there it just, the fever dream aspect of it goes up 10 times. It's like this weird leechy parasocial relationship with a woman in the warehouse, and just everything begins to rot and takes her in. It has the most mentions of piss I have ever heard in a book. Everything is like, the walls dripped, there's piss here, things are rotting, an absolute fever dream. So if you are okay with books with piss, I recommend A Girl Returned. These are the only two books I have read where two chicks are in a bed and piss themselves. Do with that information you want to. But I made the connection. A Girl Returned is nowhere as surreal. It's actually, I believe, a piece of Italian literature that is translated about a orphan girl who gets returned to her actual family and goes from this very privileged life to kind of a life in the slums, where she shares a bunk bed with a sister who pees her pants every single night. And again, there's a lot of description of how their house and the bed always smells like piss. And again, it turns into, from this gross, nasty thing to this weird, warm, intimate thing. But other than that aspect, it's a good book. It's super interesting. You really root for the main character. It's a really short read. Both of the books are probably around 100 pages. A Girl Returned also has some trigger warnings, also for incest, but other than that, it's somehow feel good. You go from kind of being grossed out to the living conditions and these girls' new siblings who are like actually her real siblings, to like actually missing them as the book progresses and rooting for them and feeling weird and out of place when this girl who is used to all this luxury comes back into luxury, or at least strides to go back to luxury. It's a weird way to join two books, but I feel like it's very valid. If you want like a real if this then that for it, if you like Paradise Rot, I think that you will like The Whole. And it basically starts with this woman agreeing to quit her job and live with her husband. And they move to a small village where the husband's family lives. And from here, she just kind of becomes a housewife. And she just sits all day in this like hot, stuffy home and looks out her window, and things just start getting kind of weird and surreal, and she ventures out from this house, and very suddenly she can't figure out if things are actually creepy and not as they seem, or if it's just her kind of being bored and out of it and disassociating. It's much slower pace. The surreal aspect of it is much lower, but it does capture that feel of like being in a haze and disassociation super well. So yeah, those are all my if this then that book recommendations. Let me know if there's any other books that you want me to read or talk about, or books that you have that also fit into these categories. I would love to hear them. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully I will have a lot more book videos for you guys because it's something I love to talk about and I am boring all the people around me. So, all right, bye.